compete very hard to get the term deposits, which the Reserve Bank is forcing them to go out and get. Because at the same time, and there is one thing the Reserve Bank has done in the last couple of weeks to put more pressure on the banks, and that's to fund their lending much more domestically and from retail investors. Now that means that they're having to push up their term deposit rates
to attract more investments.
Exactly, and that's putting pressure on Kiwibank on the other side of the game, if you like.
How much competition really are we seeing on deposit rates? Because 4.6% isn't exactly on your savings. Great, you're forking out 7% on your mortgage or 8% on your mortgage possibly still. 4.5 or 4.6% on the 1 year or the short-term rates isn't exactly a huge rate, is it?
No, and for a lot of people, they're pretty grumpy about it. And it's one.
So is it being overstated, this so-called competition on deposits?
I don't think so, because when you look at it, the official cash rate is at 2.5%, and we've got term deposit rates around 4.5%. Now, in the history of New Zealand, most times the term deposit rate will be around about the same as the official cash rate. So what's happening here is that the banks are taking some pain on that term deposit area. However, it's still lower than most people would want, and my fundamental view is that interest rates in New Zealand are too low on both the borrowing and lending side. And that's a function of the Reserve Bank pushing down the official cash rate because they think it's the right thing to do, and also because the banks, on the whole, have undercharged for fixed mortgage rates in the long run.
Come back to whether or not the government should prime up Kiwibank again then. Would that be seen as an unusual direct intervention, not so much by an owner, but by a government who happens to be the owner?
Yes, you could say that, and certainly the Labour government before the election did put in extra money into Kiwibank. There wasn't a lot of comment around that at the time, and you could argue that this is something a government should do for a bank just to make sure it's got plenty of capital. It's quite a volatile time at the moment. They could argue it's not just a good idea for competition, but just a good idea to strengthen Kiwibank. Whether they do it or not is another thing, and you could argue that this is a government intervention in a market. It's certainly a more effective intervention than trying to change the laws so that the Reserve Bank can regulate interest rates.
Are they wary of the growth in Kiwibank as well because of the very aggressive moves that you're describing that Kiwibank undertook trying to get a bigger foothold in the mortgage market last year? Might there be a concern that it is growing a bit too quickly?
Well, as long as Kiwibank has the capital to back it, that's fine, and that's the reason why it stopped growing in the last 6 months or so, is that it simply ran out of that fresh capital to keep growing, and also it found it a lot harder to get the term deposits it needed on the other side to keep growing because the banks were competing with them. So the question is, does the Reserve Bank, does the government pump more money into Kiwibank? And if they wanted to get a quick hit, if you like, on the banks, that would be the way to do it. Although my view is that the gains you get from doing that aren't big enough to justify the pain.
So if this is all a market issue, come back to this then. You have the Reserve Bank directly challenging the various banks, the big banks on their rates. You have John Key doing what? Effectively saying to the Reserve Bank, put up or shut up. What's behind his comments?
Yes, he is trying to offload, if you like, the blame back to the Reserve Bank. He's saying it's not a government thing. We need some ideas from the Reserve Bank. I think he knows that the Reserve Bank can't come up with anything too dramatic, and is looking to spread the blame
Point
around.
The finger somewhere else.
That's right.
Which is what everyone is doing.
Yes, and eventually the market will settle down and we'll move forward. Whether or not he has an impact, I think these various shots across the bows of the banks, from the government, from Parliament, the Finance and Expenditure Committee, and from the Reserve Bank, are having an impact. They're restricting some of the leeway that the banks have got. But ultimately, the banks will decide for their own reasons whether or not to cut those floating rates, and I frankly doubt that they will.
And what also of the other sort of phrase of the moment, which is, the consumers can go and sort this out. They can't, can they? With so many on fixed rates, we know the problems that people have had trying to break rates break mortgages without having enormous penalty fees. There's actually a limit to what the consumer can do as well, isn't there?
Well, there is a lot of choice right now. Now that interest rates have stopped falling, you're unlikely to be pinged by the whole problem of break fees. So for a lot of people, they are making that choice to go from a floating rate to a fixed rate because it's cheaper and because interest rates have stopped falling pretty much and are unlikely to fall that much further.
Yeah, but hang on, if you're still on, say, a 7 or an 8% mortgage and you want to move to the floating rate, you're still going to face a break fee?
That's right, if you move from fixed to floating. But what I'm saying is that those people who are already on floating can get themselves a cheaper deal and avoid, I suppose, the overcharging by going from a floating to a fixed. And the question, what you're saying is that there is a risk in the long run that you're stuck on a fixed, and that as interest rates fall, you miss out and you have these break fees. But now that we're down as low as we can go really on interest rates, the risk of that, at least in the next few years, is quite low. And for those people, they do have a choice to go fixed, and that would ensure that they get a cheaper rate, but also push the banks to realise that perhaps they were overcharging for the floating rates.
Thanks very much. As always, Bernard Hickey of the website interest.co.nz, a daily interest rates monitor website that is.